Hello and welcome to Leagues Behind, the official vodcast of the Arena Gauntlet League, where we look back at the leagues we've already played and come up with observations and insights that we hope will fuel future league designs. I'm your host, Christopher York. I'm a philosopher of sports and games and the founder of the AGL. And my special guest today is a league committee member and actual winner of the new Capenna tournament, which we'll be looking back on today. Adam S., welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Been a while.
Yeah. Which other one did I do? I did another one of these, right?
I think you did, yeah. I mean, it's been a while back. We have so many episodes. It's hard to
Oh, you know
recall.
what? No, I've never done a leagues behind. I've only done leagues ahead before.
Well, I thought it would be good to have you on to talk about New Capenna for a couple of reasons. Well, first you won the tournament, and that was I think our biggest tournament to date with 107 players. This was back in May 2022, almost 3 years ago. So this was a pretty big accomplishment at the time. And
Well,
secondly,
at the time, come on, harsh.
I'm saying like even if numbers are constant, that's probably going to be harder to do today because of the higher quality of players. But that's in no way a slight on your great accomplishment.
Oh, wow.
But also the second reason is we're about to pull into Tarkir Dragonstorm. And so I think it's an appropriate time to look back at how we did faction leagues back then and how we might approach a faction league today. So that's kind of a lead into the kinds of questions that I'll be asking. But first of all, let's go down nostalgia trail. Tell us about your league experience. Tell us about your win. Let's just revel in the glory. Take it away, Adam.
Oh, yeah. So my first ever league win, not my last, but my first ever league win was, yeah. I think I owed a lot of it to the faction structure, actually. So like we maybe should get that out of the way and introduce
Sure, please
what
do.
the actual concept was.
Yeah, let's go through the league concepts.
So
Yeah.
my memory of it is we were able to choose our own faction. There were five, just like in the set design. And I chose the Spike faction led by Cody. So there was like a real push to get the spikiest, try hardest players in the league into one faction, the Obscura.
Mm-hmm.
We had our own secret server. There was no real restriction, I don't think. I think it was entirely just you select into one of the factions. And we were pretty stacked. We had some pretty big players. This is still just before Jordan joined the league. Uh, and we had, like, if I had, I'm going to get it wrong. Who was in our faction? Maybe I can check the standings and see.
Yeah, you check it out. While
But it was,
I'll talk a little bit about the factions. While you figure out who's
yeah,
on your team. So I'll
I
just
got it up here. I
oh,
didn't post
okay.
it first.
Go through it if you want. Hit us with your teammates.
Well, just in the top eight alone, we had four of the eight were from Obscura. It was Cody, me, Sawyer, and Caleb.
No
And then we had a
slouches.
bunch more in that area
Yeah,
of the standings. Raph was up there. Andrew A. Mapo Dofu. We miss him.
we
Rip.
do.
But we were a pretty incredible lineup. I think after we did factions this way, that was probably the last time we would allow players to just choose their faction. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe not. We can see what's coming up, but
Well,
uh,
did you watch the previous episode I just did with Sawyer, where we talked about
no.
double feature? We talked about double feature as the first time, at least online, where you could pick your teammate. We talked about how unbalancing it was, even if you can pick one of your teammates for like how you can
Mm,
just run the field. And it gets worse when you can pick your entire team, and it gets even worse when you can pick your entire faction, which is a full 1/5 of the server. And we really, really see that here. Like if you look at the final stats between the brokers, riveteers, obscura, maestros, and cabaretti, your team, the obscura, has an insurmountable lead over every other faction. And I gotta say, this was pretty miserable. As a Riveteer, I think I remember looking back at this and thinking, oh, geez, we're never gonna, there's no world, literally no world where we can catch these guys.
Well, yeah, like if you look at there's a, in the standings, there's a family scoreboard sheet, and that sheet has the four other teams all within 11 points of each other. And then we are 41 points ahead of second place.
Yeah. Okay.
So
So
huge gap. The gap between first and second was four times the gap between second and fifth.
okay, let's set the
So
stage a little
pretty,
bit.
pretty grim.
Let's talk about the Dons. Let's talk about the gangs. Let's talk about the setup for the tournament. So, I'm just going to read from the rule set here. At the beginning of the tournament, the overall top performing league players from the 21 to 2022 season through the Neon Dynasty Gauntlet League, measured by their cumulative match win point totals, will be designated as Dons of one of the five gangs of New Capenna. Dons set the tone for their gang's culture and mentor and motivate their gang members, especially their new player recruits. Each Don will be provided with one foil and four non-foil promo packs to distribute to their gang members as they see fit. So this is when we're still getting promo packs, right, from our previous partner store. The Don of the gang who produces the SNC League winner will receive a side pot of roughly 2% of the overall store credit prizing. So the Don had some, store credit motivation for whipping their team into shape, which
Mhm.
is, kind of like a gang structure, I suppose. The money goes uphill to the Don. And so, do you remember anything about your Don and who was running your team? Was it Cody?
Oh, yeah, totally. It was Cody who was running it, and he did a great job, honestly. We were very well organized. So, just to begin with, I mean, we famously started a side server, which is still
Yeah.
existing
This is the
today.
origin of the secret server, right?
It is. I think he actually may have set it up before this league, but then had this sort of infrastructure ready to go when the opportunity came up. And we all joined the side server. We had an intense spreadsheet of opponents, and we really targeted like opponents that we thought we could beat. We sought out matches that we thought our guild mates or our family, crime family mates could win those matches or needed. Because one of the rules was you had to initially get wins against each of the other families, and then you get a bonus. So we were really trying to exploit that to its maximum, which kind of broke matchmaking essentially. I mean, I'm not just our doing that, everyone was doing it, but we were extremely efficient at sniping matches that we needed for our team. We even at one point had a strategy to sort of drain off matches against the worst family so that other teams would have more trouble completing full sets against them.
Well, let's talk a little bit about
And
that
we,
rule because other people won't understand that rule either. So let's talk about stashes very briefly. The stashes rule was this: every time a gang member wins a set of four or more matches against at least one member of each rival gang, they move up a level and receive a stash, which is one reward pack from a randomly selected historic set that can be added to their league pool. So there were four levels. The associate level was when you got four or more match wins against your rival gangs. Soldier level, 8 or more match wins against your rival gangs. The Capo level, 12 or more match wins. And the Consigliere level, which is 16 or more match wins. So you could get up to 4 bonus packs for your league pool if you were
yeah,
smart and sought out rival gang members to play against. And of course, it wasn't in your interest to play your own gang because there was a faction rule in place that said your gang basically gets a big store credit chunk of the prizing. I think this was 25% of the prizing was set aside just for the gang. So you
yep,
wanted to max your wins against other gangs anyway. The idea was this would push people to vary their, let's say, opponent choosing styles, sort of spread them out a bit more than they would normally because hunting the weak was still very much a troublesome and pernicious strategy at this time. So we're hoping that maybe make people seek out matches they normally wouldn't need to get those extra packs, and maybe you can mitigate the negative effects of punching down. Now, as I recall, this was the one time in league history where we had to trash a rule halfway through.
Mm.
Right, so
Yeah, I was going to say, I think you read the revised rule, right? The rule that you read there didn't, if I heard you correctly, didn't mention the initial rule was you had to get one win against each of the opposing factions,
no,
right?
that's what it
Whereas
said.
what we,
Yeah.
yeah, and we ended up changing it to be just you needed four wins against not your own faction, if I remember correctly,
Yeah.
because
So,
it broke matchmaking.
I mean, yeah, there were complaints about difficulties of finding enough players of different gangs, right? From my perspective, I don't know. I didn't have any issue doing this, so I felt like it was a bit of an overreaction or a bit unwarranted. And if you got your pack a match later than you normally would have, I don't see that as being a hugely unbalancing thing. But I remember that people were maybe already triggered about being in unequal factions from the very beginning, and so they're
Mm.
quite sensitive to anything that could further unbalance the tournament. So yeah, I mean, I think there's nothing wrong with the rule, honestly. I think on the face of it, you think about it, like you got 5 matches a week, and you just from the pool of again, this is like 107 players, just find people that are in 4 different factions. Doesn't look like a quest that's impossible to achieve from my perspective.
So a number of things here, right? Like I think the first one is for players listening to this today,
Yeah.
we're so used to the matchmaking bot, but this was one of the last leagues without the matchmaking bot. I think it was the second last. And it was because of this league. I think I made the initial suggestion and then Sawyer was like, I can implement this. But that we ended up developing the bot to fix some of the matchmaking problems that were happening in this league, right? Because like we were sniping. So you were saying that part of the idea of this rule was to fix sniping weak players and
Right.
force you to distribute evenly. I mean, we as the group that was most predatory, I think, we were sniping weak players from all the other teams and soaking up all of those matches so that no one else got weak players.
Yeah. Which
So
which
it
which
didn't
which
quite
is
work out
which
as
which is
intended.
smart, right? That's what the tournament rules encouraged. That was the flavor of the plane. That was
Oh
exactly the
yeah.
kind of behavior that we were implicitly encouraging exceptionally for this tournament offering. So we all got in the spirit of things, but maybe some of us are just better criminals than others.
Yeah, well, we've moved away from that in league design because I think it's fun. I really like that as a thing. Like, I really enjoy metagame strategy in that way, but some people hate it. Some people just want to play their matches and not be punished because they're not being predatory.
Yeah, well,
I think
I
in
think there should
general,
there should
probably people.
be there should be tournaments for spikes, and there should be tournaments for
Yeah,
Timmies and Johnnies and
I agree.
Dennies. So I don't have any
Yeah.
problem
Well,
necessarily with there being like an extra spiky tournament, but I do think like this one broke this one broke the server in a couple of ways that I think it's an important
yeah.
growth point, right? We learned a lot of lessons from SNC. Probably wasn't the funnest tournament to play in if you weren't Obscura, but if you're Obscura, I'm sure it felt real good to just run the game against all the other factions, right?
Yeah. And we were competing against each other for the top 8 spots, which was interesting in the end game. But yeah, so I think to go back to your point about, did this really break it or not?
Yeah.
I think I was also with you in that I didn't think the rule needed to change, but as we went further into the league, it was going to snowball and get worse and worse. I do think, like, one thing to mention about this rule is that it's win more. And we've had discussion about this basically in every league since. Like, how much can a rule be win more? How much should you reward winning, which is already a sign that you have a stronger deck, right? And so this was very lightly win more. It was only after 4 wins that you got a bonus. but it was still win more. And so the fact that, for example, we could make it very difficult for other teams to complete theirs meant that they had to either choose between sacrificing, like if you just don't go for the extra pack, you start to fall behind against us even more than you were already. So I think there was a real problem there. And also as the weakest team basically became eliminated, there were going to be no additional bonus packs available, right? The matches against whichever the last place team were going to become so rare by week 4 or 5 that capturing those wins was going to become too important in the metagame. I think
Yeah, I mean,
so.
at the same time,
I
like
think probably
that's
was
a
the
fairly unique dynamic and point of engagement, though, right? Like the idea that you,
yeah
I mean, there's a political game that comes into
yeah
play there. Like, who can persuade players from the losing faction to give their matches to them? That I mean, and in a faction tournament, that's already a lot of political stuff happening. I think that it's appropriate to have that kind of dynamic emerge. It's a story moment. And say what you want about Streets of New Capenna as a league experience. Wow, a lot of stories, a lot of moments arising out of this, and we're already
yeah.
hearing
I'm
some
with
of them
you.
from you. Yeah.
I think that's like a good point, and I do think it's nice to have that mixed in. So I agree with you, and I personally really like designs where the metagame does become this important, but some people I think really don't. So I think we need to have space for both of those things,
Yeah, we couldn't have this every
Like
tournament,
sometimes
and for us to be a healthy community, right? Like we couldn't run this back every tournament. We couldn't
no.
have faction the tournament series.
I think
But
another thing that came out of this rule that's interesting is we've tried to avoid, although we've revisited it sometimes, but when we give a random pack, we've tried to avoid giving out the pack from the main set because what you could get as your random historic pack, a pack of SNC in this league. And I think that was just such a feel bad when you got one, even though it's like technically more powerful, but not getting a sort of bit of chaos into your pool. Because this otherwise, this set was entirely SNC packs. You only like so for any of your punishment packs, you got SNC. And the only way you got additional chaotic packs was through this rule.
yeah,
So I think denying people the bonus packs was both like a strategic disadvantage, but it was also kind of a fun disadvantage,
well,
right?
yeah,
That you were losing
and
the
this
bit of
and
chaos. So I think that's something people felt a
oh,
lot.
for sure. I think I probably could have enjoyed this tournament more if I had more non SNC packs to play with because the set really wasn't all that when you look back at it. Right, like no one's gonna look back at SNC like, wow, that was just the greatest format, right? So when you're just stuck just playing SNC for 6 weeks and you're on a losing faction, the other team's got an insurmountable lead. It just, I remember I was feeling quite discouraged. I think that my Don was John P. Goku or go home, and
Yeah.
we had fun, but we knew we were on a sinking ship. It was a bit of like gallows humor in our server. Let's go back to
Yeah.
that though. So I think like part of the reason for having a side. So I'm the server owner for the AGL, right? So if there's a thread that's open, I can kind of look in it. So I think even though I'd promised not to look in on any other gangs' activities, I think that maybe Cody had sort of worried that we can't take this guy at his word. We need to like actually leave the server, open up a different server to get full privacy. And I do agree, like good tournament mechanics, generally speaking, should be completely transparent, and there should be checks and balances, and you shouldn't have to rely entirely on goodwill and trust. Even though I hope that we've built up enough of that over our years of offering tournaments that we can be trusted to not peak when we're not
Yeah.
supposed to. Still, like that was the only gang that jumped the ship, but that was a historic moment, right? That was. I don't necessarily think it's a schism in the community, but it opened up a kind of place to vent, I suppose. If you weren't happy with what's happening on the main server, I suppose it just became a place to just spew bile. right? For a while, anyway.
Well, yeah, I
I'm
don't.
sure that it's
I
changed
think,
since then.
yeah, I think it was a safe place to be critical. Although I do think it not only has it changed. I think one of the reasons it changed is that we got better as a server at taking feedback,
Yeah, yeah, of
and
course.
like really like engaging with it in a way, like not taking it personally, not, really being open to feedback, even though sometimes I hear feedback and I'm just like, you just don't get it. Like, you don't understand what went into planning this, or like, yeah, we did the thing you're suggesting and everyone hated it 2 leagues ago, like that kind of impulse is something that I've had to fight a lot. But I think now, I mean, yeah, so the side server still exists. A lot of the stuff though that was so successful about it, we've just slowly incorporated into the main league.
Right.
We separate deck building threads we've got now in the main league. Um, yeah, like it's a lot. I think we're a lot more open to feedback, and we really have gotten very good at incorporating feedback
Yeah.
that we get. So, like, I do think, yeah, maybe there was an element of it where it was a safe place to complain, and not also sometimes it's a safe place to complain about like players who weren't there, like not
Right.
about the league so much as
Right.
like
It was a
this player was a
clubhouse.
jerk to
It
me.
was a clubhouse, essentially.
Yeah. Well, I mean, initially, so I don't think that Cody started it because he didn't think he could trust having a secret kind of like trust that you wouldn't spy on the Obscura if we ran it through the main server. I think what actually was happening was that he had simply opened up a side server for just some spikes to kind of strategize on leagues generally. He, I think he may have even had it when he won his league in Neo, which it was the sort of premier set before SNC. And then he just sort of had the infrastructure lying there. So when we started it up, we were like, oh, yeah, let's just have our own space. We can stream matches over there. We can do practice matches. We can run, you know, uh, we can have strategic discussions.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I think it, I do think so. You were asking initially about sort of memories of Cody as the Don, and I think he is very good at that kind of community building stuff. I mean, I think we're very good at it in the league, and a lot of the stuff, as I say, is stuff we've incorporated from what he set up over there.
Yeah.
Because I think that's something that he is naturally really good at. You know,
Yeah, I think there's some sort of
like he
parallel
hosted us.
evolution happening there, right? And I think the schisms healed somewhat, and I do think a lot of good ideas do flow from the activity on the side server. So really, it's just different ways of getting to what I hope is the same destination, which is us playing good Magic with each other.
Yeah, and for a long time, that also became a place for, having non-magic discussions, right? Or
Right.
like posting about ourselves in real life. But then like again, that stuff we kind of figured out which bits of that were desirable and then brought that over to the main server. And now we have non-magic threads and forums, or non-limited magic threads and forums all built into the main server. And I mean that all came from like we didn't want to clutter up the main server initially. So all that
Right.
stuff grew on the side server. And then eventually we were like, well, look, this has enough value that we should add a bit of clutter, to give people space to do this on our main server. And I think that's all been hugely successful.
Yeah, I
Like
think it's been
just really,
good for community building, good for making people feel a bit more at home. I think at the beginning there was a bit of a worry, like, well, we want this to be about magic and not about politics or religion or whatever else could drag people apart. But I think that you need to have a little bit of that. You need to have a little bit of play on that in that area for people to sort of
yeah,
feel like more complete members of the community. So I'm glad that it feels more like home now and not just a tournament server. And I think a lot of people probably spend a lot more time on the AGL server because of that, right?
yeah,
Because there's room for more dimensions or aspects of their personalities. All right,
yeah.
so
I think that's great.
yeah, me too, and I think that's why a lot of people comment on the sort of the strength of the community. And I remember reading something early this week, like from a new joiner, saying like things are pretty good on here. Maybe that's because everybody on here is a bit older, I think that's partly
Mm,
the case, but it's also partly the case that we've been at this for years and years. Like we didn't just
yeah.
pop up out of nowhere. And so I think there is some sort of
Okay.
like imprint in the DNA of the server culture, right? That kind of keeps things on the rails where it might go off in other servers that don't have that sort of depth of history or familiarity with a lot of the key players.
Well, and I think, yeah, a lot of that is, I mean, I think that is, some of that is down to the individuals that we have in our community, but some of that is down to the culture that's been built up. Some of it from the get-go. Like I think using people's first names, which we still get occasional pushback against, but I do think that has really proven itself to be an effective way of sort of thwarting the anonymous culture of, other Discord servers or the internet generally. You know, we kind of avoided a lot of the worst bits of this kind of server setup by just having people get to know each other as people by their names and like seems silly, it's kind of arbitrary, but like really I do think that is one of the big factors, and then yeah, as we kind of talked about, as we built up the server and given outlets to talk about politics or to talk about, you know, your complaints, your complaints about the league or whatever, like that's all I think just really made a culture of like civility,
Yeah.
and community that I think it's working great.
Well, there were two reasons for that originally, right? So one is that everybody came, or most people came, from the face-to-face store in Montreal, where everybody knew each other anyway, and so it was silly to use an alias. And the other reason is that your name is keyed to your store credit wins, so we need to know who you are to give you the prizes and to cash you out. So it's logistical, but it's also practical and it's humanizing, right? So we're not just, I don't know, uh, bag of dicks, 2021
Yeah,
or whatever, right? It's not like that. It's we're accountable in some ways for what we do and say, and that not in a bad way, but like it gives you pause, right? Well, my name's attached to this next comment I make. Maybe I'll think about it once or twice before I hit send, because I do think
yeah,
like there is a good in playing this tournament series that people don't want to sacrifice by alienating themselves to this community.
yep,
Like, so if I want to
yeah.
play
I
fun
think that
tournaments,
really
then
is.
I don't want people to hate my guts. Then maybe let's just keep it civil. Let's keep it cool.
I mean, I think it's a huge success. It feels a little arbitrary to me. Like, why do people respond this way to having their name known? Like, it's not like people really, we still, that alone doesn't let you know who the person is in any way, but it clearly has an effect on the culture, I think, things like that. And yeah, like almost incidental, but like we've built up the community in large part, I think, because you're not anonymous, because you know the person as the person by their name.
This is a little off
And,
topic.
the more we do, yeah.
This is a little off topic and incidental, but I haven't done a
Mm.
server purge of unnamed joiners for a while. What's your feeling on server purges? Should we get rid of people who don't comply with the server standards, who don't give us their names, who don't play the tournaments? I feel like maybe that's been part of the way we've kept bots out in the past, or kept lurkers out. Right? We just kind of do this sort of periodic culling. I haven't done that for a league or two now. I'm kind of wondering, should we change policy on that? Is there like a reason that we should be trimming the non-players, the non-named players off the server?
Yeah, I don't have a strong feeling on that. I don't think we need to purge people for being lurkers. I do think we need to just do whatever it takes to avoid the bots. Like we had that
Right.
spell over the summer, right, where we were getting spam posts and stuff, and that can't happen.
Yeah, that was the
I
last
think
time
that
when I
has
when
such
I
an
when I
immediate,
when I trimmed everybody. I trimmed like 100 people off the server, or bots, or whoever, just for the sake of like not getting everybody not getting pinged 5 times in the middle of the night
oh yeah,
for adult websites.
I know.
So
Yeah, so as long as we're like, I think that's great. If that's what it takes to stop,
yeah,
spam posts. Yeah, but like I don't see any problem with people who hang out and don't play in the tournaments and are
right,
sort of feeling it out.
sure.
Like those people, can stay.
Yeah.
Ideally, they would start using their names. I wouldn't if they're posting a lot, but they're anonymous. Then I think yeah, we need to like force them to comply. Under threat of leaving. But like that's fringe. It just doesn't happen that much. People who stick around past the start of a tournament seem to either join in or take off. You know.
All right, let's get
So
back to
I
the
don't. I don't.
let's
think we need the threats.
Okay, yeah, we'll
Yeah.
let that one be then. Let's get back to the SNC, and let's get back
Yep.
to how gangs were formed. I'm going to read the rules in this because it's not like anything went. There was actually what they call the sorting hat algorithm in place that was supposed to bring balance to the force. And we'll talk
Oh
about
yeah.
why and how this failed. So it says when registering for the tournament, each player is asked to choose which gang they would like to join. Players will then be drafted into gangs in descending snake order, based on previous league performances. The draft procedure will follow the sorting hat algorithm. So basically, people could draft the Dons could draft who they wanted into their gang, but they had to pick the next five players down who were within a 1.5 average sealed wins of the next top ranked player. So there was power. You could express your preference, I believe, prior to the tournament, which gang you wanted to join, and your Don could pick you. But I think that there was this algorithm in place, which is obviously flawed. This was Johnny's construction. This goes to him. The credit and the blame goes to him in this case.
Yeah. I'm trying to read this and follow along with you, and I have no idea.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can't even tell that that's what this.
It's not clear. So, so the first Don, which was the lowest ranked Don, was given the first pick of the players who had affiliated themselves with their gang. So they would pick from the top five whoever had chosen to be in their gang, and if there are more than ones, they could pick the highest. Then it would go down to the next Don. The next Don would pick from their top five. But maybe the issue here was that so many people had decided prior to the tournament to affiliate with Obscura that there were only good
Yeah.
picks, right? And so as a result, the Dons, leftover Dons, just got the people who had no preference, or the ones who had sort of randomly chosen to join their gang. So I think maybe that's where it all fell down, was the pre-tournament collusion for all of our best players to join Obscura, right? That kind of made the algorithm fail. Is that fair to say?
I mean, I don't really understand the algorithm looking at it. So maybe. I think definitely my memory is it wasn't so much that there was collusion, it was that the Dons were allowed to basically advertise for their families
Right.
and players were allowed to rank. And Cody's ad was basically like, we're going to win this. And so if you want to win, join here. But, it wasn't like secret collusion, like, let's all pick this. It was like, the pitch, because my memory is, other people like Damien were like, we're gonna have fun. This is gonna
Right.
be the most fun, right? And like Cody's pitch was, we're gonna win, and that kind of was the dividing line, and other people were sort of on a spectrum there. Uh, but like, yeah, so I know that a lot of top players put in as their preference Obscura. How that impacted the algorithm, I can't say I totally understood. It seems like mostly we got placed into Obscura if that was our first pick. So
Yeah, it seems like if we were designing this today, right? And I think this is a good transition point to sort of like looking at how we do SNC differently. If we did SNC today, I'd want that algorithm to be a bit more intuitive, a bit more straightforward, and a bit more like parsable to the average player. We don't want people to sort of. I mean, like if we are designing today's tournaments and we find it obscure, and we're possibly some of the most invested players on the server, to the average player, this must have just read like gobbledygook.
yeah, I think you just turn your brain off when you look at that. Um, but like that's maybe not an indictment of it. I mean, I think it may have been fine. You could run back that algorithm potentially. I don't really know. I think you just can't allow people to preference pick, into different factions,
Right.
right? So we did a complex algorithm for Khans of Tarkir, which was better, but you just weren't allowed to really express a preference. You were divided up based on a pure algorithmic sort of distribution of players,
Let the chips
vaguely
fall where they may.
tracking their
Yeah.
results. We still ended up with a runaway winner, but not anything as extreme as we got in SNC, where we sort of knew 2 to 3 weeks in that we had it locked up.
Right.
So, yeah,
So
so I think
how would we do it differently then?
probably
Because
best.
we have a couple of faction leagues now, right? SNC and Khans of Tarkir, where we went mono set, which to me is like it's kind of a death knell for interesting play because I think at least a quarter of your packs have to be from outside of the main set. Otherwise, it just becomes homogenous. You just get more of the same and more of like all of the archetypes. Yes, they come to life, but there's very little surprise. There's very little novelty in that. And as a deck builder, like I get some kicks out of deck building around you know, cards that are outside the set. That's kind of the kick for me. Maybe I'm a Timmy, a bit. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's probably right.
Or is it a Johnny? Is it the Johnny the one who
This
goes
you
the nuts and bolts of the situation? I think that's a Johnny, and a Timmy likes the big creatures. I think I'm more like I like to
yeah.
find the connections between cards between sets, so maybe that makes me a Johnny.
Your question here was a curveball because you started off asking, should we basically run back the algorithm? How should we divide people up? And
Yeah,
then you switched mid-question
yeah.
to should we have a monoset league?
No, no. I
Right.
know
I
there's
think the new Tarkir.
there's a couple things there, and yeah, that was sloppy of me. I apologize for that.
No, but I just think it's interesting that those are kind of connected for you because I do think those are two separate issues, right? Like I think we could go to the next Tarkir, the return to Tarkir, and say, yeah, we're not doing a monoset league. I don't think we're going to want to do that as a monoset league.
Yeah.
I think we're going to want to mix in some different stuff there.
Well, the
But
original thing for Khans of Tarkir being just Khans of Tarkir was that it was a bit of a city in a bottle, and if you let any sort of
yeah,
foreign elements into that sealed environment, it's going to overwhelm those cards.
yeah,
I don't
yeah,
know if that was really the case necessarily. We probably could have let a little bit of air into the room,
yeah. It's
but
hard to know, right? Like I think clearly there was something that we needed to do to punch up KTK because that one really felt like it
yeah,
dragged.
yeah.
But it was a unique situation, right? Like we were playing the set way after it released. We were playing it years after its initial release, and it was kind of like out of time. But I do think we would have had other problems if we had just thrown in other sets there because
Hello.
KTK is so internally consistent and uses a bunch of mechanics that seem ridiculous next to normal magic mechanics, right? Like you just are never casting a vanilla 2/2 for three
Sorry, one
if
sec,
you
Adam.
have
You
the
got a
option.
monologue here. I've got an emergency call. You keep going. Keep the air
Okay,
going. This is a unique opportunity for you.
so I'm monologuing. Okay, yeah. So I think that when we visited Hans of Tarkir, in that context, a monoset made a lot of sense, although it worked out badly. Like I think badly, but it worked out not optimally.
I don't know either.
I think that it really dragged and felt like there was not enough variety, which is always a problem when we do mono leagues. But KTK felt
Master, yeah.
significantly
Yeah,
worse
just
than,
the
say,
spinning part that fell off,
MH3,
and we got to bring it back
in
to
my
it.
opinion.
Okay.
So,
We have
do we
one ticket
revisit
after
a
school.
mono
Not
set
emergency.
when we go back to Tarkir? I think the answer is definitely not. But hopefully, that'll just be a totally
Okay, I
different
got to take it back.
situation.
All right.
And
Okay, love you. Bye.
that's all I have to say about that topic. But on the topic that you originally raised of whether or not we should have this sort of algorithm to determine the factions when we return to Tarkir, I think that's a super interesting question. People already have Tarkir factions. So
Right.
how is that going to interact? Do
Yeah.
we maintain the original Tarkir factions and then add new players? Or Do we realign players, break up the Jeskai winning team somehow?
Yeah.
That's one I think people are going to have to start giving us input on pretty soon. Like, how do we want to divide up if we are doing a faction league, which presumably we are when we return to Tarkir? Do we stay in our original factions or not and add the new players? I don't know. That's a tough question. And
I'm back, by
if
the
we're
way.
adding,
In case you.
if we're totally realigning,
Yeah.
I kept us going. I kept us going. If we're totally realigning, how does that work? Are we I guess we'd be stripped of our original alignment and
Yeah.
then we'd have to set up another algorithm
Yeah.
again.
So, I mean, there's a couple of things here, right? Like, hopefully, regarding the mono set thing, I'll go back to that just briefly. Like, hopefully,
Yeah.
Tarkir Dragonstorm is like a set that's more robust. It's built to modern specs, and therefore it can take a little bit of
Yeah.
competition from outside packs, right?
Yeah.
So maybe that'll be a better chance to add packs from outside the main set. And in terms of like whether or not we keep the original factions or not, I mean, there's something fun and good about getting the band back together,
Yeah.
right? But I think that we'd have to be quite careful. Like we'd have to have some sort of again past performance related weighting on the player base.
Yeah.
So again, like that, we'd probably need somebody like Steve, right, to sort of apply some sort of algorithm to assigning player strengths in a numerical way.
Yeah, that's what we could do, right? That's how we did the original KTK lineup. And we could revisit that same or similar formula. We could leave people in their factions and figure out how strong mathematically those factions are right now, and then add players to compensate, right? Um, so that's an option. One thing that this made me think is you could do something like give each faction gets to choose which outside sets it's going to get
Oh
in
wow.
with its punishment pack. That could be fun.
Yeah, or like have
And
those sets
turn
be
it into like
drafted.
a
Yeah.
yeah, like have it be like a mini set wars kind of thing, where you get to pick two or three additional packs that get slotted in. I don't know. I'm kind of thinking out loud on this, but that could be fun, right? Like have Jeskai gets to choose which other packs it wants. Sultai gets to, or yeah, I guess you were saying it could be drafted, right? Like could be that it's unique, right? So if Sultai takes Thunder Junction, then that's it. No one else can get Thunder Junction, and you get those packs occasionally somehow, right? Like not every punishment pack, but
Yeah, and it could be
that's an
done so
idea.
that I mean that's sort of just kicking around like how we might do things differently in the future. So regarding the specifics of SNC and how we might do different things differently here,
Mhm.
modify the algorithm. I think the Dawn system actually was okay, right? I
Mhm.
think there's nothing wrong with having a leader, assigning a leader to the faction,
Yeah.
and having them have a sort of small bonus if their team wins. I suppose like it's like a coaching bonus in the NFL or something, right? It's like if you can get your
Yeah.
team over the line, you get a performance bonus. I think that's kind of fun,
Yeah.
and it's not unbalancing.
Yeah.
So we might do the con leaders or the Dons mechanic almost the same.
Yeah.
The stash mechanic, obviously, I guess we just scrap that because of. I mean, again, I think a tournament can take a bit of win more in it, but maybe as you're saying, this is a foot over the line.
I mean, it was pretty fun though. So it might be something. I mean, you could have that be the way we do offset packs in Tarkir or revisit it. Like, or if we went back to SNC for any reason, I think it's a mechanic that I would run back. I wouldn't do it all the time
Right.
because it is win more. And you got to be aware at the outset that it's going to mess with your matchmaking if you make it too restrictive in who qualifies for the bonus packs. So you got to be cautious of that. But I think we had it figured out by the end of SNC. I do think the revised rule worked fine. It was a little less exciting though, right? That you don't have to snipe particular other families. You just have to beat anybody.
Yeah, I do think the
But
original was a bit more flavorful and kind of gave you. I mean, I guess that when I was thinking of this rule, I was thinking about something like. Remember those old Zynga games? Right.
no,
There
it's not.
was like it used to be like a Facebook game where you kind of like when you log into
Mm.
Facebook you play this like flash game where I mean it was just a time sink where you'd uh, I think it was called gosh this is really stretching my memory. It was something stupid like Mafia Wars or something. It was just and so like
Oh yeah,
you
yeah.
would like just click a button and complete a task and there was like a burn down counter but it was kind of make work kind of game, like by today's standards, not really that great. But you got to like sort of up your rank, and there was a sort of feeling of accomplishment, like I'm doing something, for the family. I'm part of something greater. I think that was the psychology that the
Right.
whole thing operated on. And if you look at the history of Zynga, I think most of their software was just this kind of like click on a button until something superficially rewarding occurs. So I think maybe like in terms of like making each, I knew that the Dons had something exciting to do, but I wasn't sure
Yeah.
that your average member of the gangs would have something exciting to do. So it was like a mini quest for each gang member that I was trying to sort of pitch at the time. And I thought that the stash thing would work. It'd be a pretty strong incentive to get these offset packs,
Yeah.
and then they just try to snipe people from each family, and we give them again if you could make it in a week, pretty big accomplishment, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I
So
mean,
we had mini quests also because there were bonus packs, whatever those were called, the promo packs. Um,
right,
every week the Don's got one promo pack to give out, right? So
correct.
we had a lot of promo packs floating around at that point. But I remember those worked really well because we set up challenges. It was like if the lowest ranked player to complete all their matches or whatever to win the most improved player for the week would win one. So we got to use them in really kind of like fun social ways. It's kind of a shame that we've lost that. And maybe there's some way to do that with a portion of the prize pool or whatever.
Like give up physical
Um,
prizes again, or
well, or it doesn't need to be physical prize. It could be just like
credit,
the con gets $5 to give out to one of their con members every week or whatever.
right?
Uh, I don't know. I'm just riffing, but that aspect was really good. So we used the promo packs to reward people who improved a lot over the week or who played all their matches. Then you got entered into a draw. So, like, actually kind of served generally desirable ends for the server.
Mm.
But also was sort of a faction building tool that I thought that worked really well. And losing that's a bit of a bummer, but
Yeah, that's not a bad thing
uh,
to reintroduce in terms of just having like discretionary credit that the con gets to distribute. The spoils of war, let's call it, or something like that, right? That would be something good to reintroduce.
and it might be more impactful if they use that credit to purchase a like actual physical thing. Like the Don could get a pack or a card or whatever for a certain amount if we had a budget, right? Like we could actually spend the credit to create a physical thing, right? I
Yep.
don't know.
I
I'm thinking
mean,
out loud on
I
this,
guess
but
the question is whether
yeah, that was
the
something.
postage might be more than the pack. I suppose is the only thing.
Yeah, I know. That's welcome to the world.
Well, but that's the
That's
thing.
true.
So a lot of those promo packs, as I understand it, were never claimed from the store because people
Yeah, yeah.
didn't make physical orders, so they would just get recycled into next league's promo packs.
Kind of optimal though. I mean, in some ways, that just meant that we had an infinite stock of these things that were nominally being given out, but only claimed by people who really cared.
Yeah.
Kind of great on a level, but yeah, maybe not.
Well, we want people to
Uh,
we want people to
yeah,
be able to use their prizes, right? And I suppose that the way that
yeah,
most people use their prizes, if they haven't like won a league or top eight at a league like the last one, like last league, if you came third place, you got $80, which is still
mm,
pretty darn good, right? And that's enough to make a physical order. But if you're not one of those people, if you're just like occasionally getting your entry fee back, if you're just kind of like getting by, in the AGL, then we want you to be able to use your prizes in a way that doesn't cost you more money than the prize itself does. Because then we haven't given you a prize; we've given you a chore, right, at that point.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Especially
so
with the growing community in Europe and Asia, it's harder. Those people presumably can't even ship stuff to themselves. That's a whole side bit of this.
right.
But yeah, I do think that was effective anyway. There might be some way to bring back discretion by the Don or the Con to give out some kind of prize, whether it's a physical prize or some store credit or something else. Um, would be good. I thought that worked really well in SNC. That was a feature every week. There was a raffle or there was a little goal to accomplish
Yeah,
given out by the Don.
yeah. It
And
was
at
an
least for
event.
us, those were cool.
Yeah, I think it was for even the gangs that were relatively speaking, failing to hit their marks. Still, pretty exciting to have a little bit of extra gravy ladled on there.
Mhm.
All right, so looking back, final verdict on SNC. How do you think it stacks up compared with the other faction leagues we've had on the server? For example, you know, Khans of Tarkir or Strixhaven. Where does it fall? Where would you rank SNC in total compared to those two different leagues?
Well, I wasn't here for Strix, so
Right, right.
I can't. I've heard good things about Strixhaven. It sounds like it was a really cool one.
It was a blast, yeah.
Um, I liked it more than I liked Cons of Tarkir. Although I must be a little biased because my experience was that I had a very strong showing and then I ultimately won the league. And also our faction won. So we really won the whole thing. I mean, I loved my SNC experience. I loved the Mega Draft. I really just enjoyed the whole faction experience there. Um, I liked it better. I mean, the other kind of quasi faction league that I was part of was the Vow, where you join one of the two vampire houses, which I also thought was pretty cool. Although which also suffered from a runaway winning team because of the way it was structured. So that I thought it was better than that as well. So I mean, I think SNC was a success. I would run back similar mechanics in a future faction league, and we should definitely look at these mechanics and how they should influence Dragonstorm
Yeah,
if we're going to go faction.
I think that's the thing. I think that when you rank SNC over cons, so do I, but I also rank Strixhaven over SNC. I think we've run back faction leagues, but we haven't gotten better at doing it. Somehow we've gotten worse at doing faction leagues. So I think we're gonna have to do something pretty radically new and exciting to reinvigorate this tournament
Mm.
concept, which has been quite popular in the past. But I feel like we got to take a big swing. I think it was even you, Adam, who said that the biggest league failures from the past year of play have been when
Mhm.
we've leaned too heavily on things that worked before.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
I worry that if we don't want to have a fourth installment online of a faction league and have it slump even lower than Khans of Tarkir. I do think we have to and again, we're still debating this because we don't know much about the set yet. Obviously, we just learned
Mm.
yesterday or the day before about Ether Drift, which is coming out in 2-3 weeks. So Dragonstorm is still shrouded in mystery, but I would say watch this space for our next leagues ahead, or the one after Ether Drift anyway, where we'll be looking at Tarkir Dragonstorm. We'll see how we solve this problem, because right now it is just a problem, kind of looming on the horizon, something we've got to think about. But yeah, it's
Yeah,
been
it's hard to know, right? Like, have we had declining quality of faction leads, or is that really like largely to do with the underlying sets, right? Because
right,
SNC was a flop of a limited set.
right.
I thought it actually was better in League than it was in Draft, but I think generally a low point in draft sets in that span. Uh, And then Cons of Tarkir was also kind of like, I mean, it's a vaunted bet that people really were excited for, but did it hold up today, right? Like, is this really more about the sets that were underlying those faction leagues? I'm not sure.
Yeah,
But
I
maybe it's a
mean,
little of both. I don't know. But I do think we have to be careful about just thinking we can replay the hits. So that was in reference to cons and then um, plane chase being both sort of like not quite living up to the thing they were mimicking,
right.
right? The league that they were based on originally. And yeah, so I mean, I think there is a level at which we need to be really careful about. We're just going to redo this concept because people loved it. Um, I think we need to be really guarded that that's maybe not good enough. Have we ever run back a hit and have it be a hit the second time?
Whew, that's a tough question. Well, I think it. I mean, look, we have had the map mechanic hit again and again, right? Like where you just basically
Yep.
have your choice between two packs. That seems to be sort of evergreen in terms of its utility
Yeah.
and popularity. Seems to be something we can add to almost any set and have it thematically fit one way or the other. To the point that
Yeah.
people on the server are like, oh god, here we go, another X or Y, pack open mechanic. I suppose over the past year we've leaned on it a bit more heavily as a technology. Once we figured out, or once Steve figured out more precisely how to make this work with the bots, it's a pretty fun and easy one to run back. So we kind of dipped our ladle into that soup pretty often. I still think it's got legs, and I still think it doesn't make a tournament worse for having that mechanic.
Yeah.
So that's one where, it doesn't seem to suffer with iteration.
Yeah.
Maybe as you're saying, there's something to do with the set quality in there because Strixhaven was fairly deep, I think.
Yeah. I think
Maybe
so too.
deeper than SNC, and SNC in turn was deeper than Cons of Tarkir. I don't want to put all the blame on the set though.
Yeah.
I do think like some of the things that made SNC rank lower than Strixhaven had to do with the unbalanced factions and
Mhm.
had to do with it being a mono set. Right? So like, there's just those things. I think
Yeah.
are just going to make your
Yeah, I think
experience
that's right.
worse.
I think that's important. It's really hard. I mean, it's so interesting, right, from a design perspective, like how hard it is to disentangle those things, how
Mm.
hard it is to take away the right lessons from successes or from failures. I think it's really challenging, right? Like just not knowing, sometimes we have a pretty good idea of why something failed. Like we know what went wrong with the new plane chase, right? But like not exactly what went wrong with it.
Yeah.
So I think it's
Well,
important that we do take away those lessons, but
what's funny was
it's
that
hard to know
I
sometimes.
know this probably goes into a different different vodcast, but I do think like part of the plane chase negative feedback was like it's kind of like everybody was like all set to go to the casino and they were stoked for it. Like tonight we're gonna win big, and so they basically you know everyone was hyped about a night at the roulette table
Yeah.
until it kept coming up red every time, and then everyone's like, "Oh man, I'm really not enjoying this night of roulette the way I thought I would be enjoying this night of roulette." I mean, I don't think that like I don't know. I think that the league committee did its work, made a lot of interesting new planes. On paper, it probably should have been more exciting than the original plane chase offering. But the way that the numbers came up, gosh, we're definitely going to have to do it differently if we ever go back to that. Plane chase 3 or whatever. We really have
Yeah.
to ensure, like, guarantee somehow that
Yeah.
no roll of the dice is going to thwart the good design that went into it. I think there's lots of great
Well, that
ideas in those planes. I think there's actually some of those planes that we didn't roll hold mechanics that we could, orient an entire league around.
yeah. Yeah, I agree totally.
Mm.
I think that's the interesting thing about feedback, right? Is that, we take people's feedback seriously. There is also an element though where sometimes you don't know whether or not you had a good experience because the thing that you thought, like, so yeah, you're saying people thought they liked roulette, and it turns out they like winning at roulette, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, exactly.
I think that's important, right? As the designers, we have to be head of people's own assessment of why they had a good time, you know? Like, we have to really know. Because, like, somebody put it as, like, yeah, like, I love the random chance, but I don't want the chance for this to be super boring, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's just not an outcome. Then it doesn't make it more fun when it's not boring, that there was an opportunity for it to be not at all interesting,
With
right? And, like,
with regards to
I think that's
that,
right, but it's hard to know that counterfactually, you
well,
know?
I think to my point, right? Like, can we have some Winmore mechanics? Can we have some mechanics that actually are feel bad? I think that like
Yep.
Phyrexian plane that I proposed that where you don't get a punishment pack that week, I think people would have preferred that over nothing happening.
We would have gotten killed if that was the one different plane we got was one where you simply got nothing at all. We would have been. I don't agree. I don't agree with your assessment here. It would have been interesting. I think that maybe works in the context of something more structured, right? But the problem is if I mean, there's a lot of problems with this. There's a problem with that in terms of then everyone only plays 3 matches, and that's a disaster, or 4 if that's the minimum. Uh, but also, it's just going to feel so bad. I think if you have feels bads, everybody has to get them kind of equally. You know, I'm not against feel bads and I'm not against win more, but I think they have to be used
Sparingly and
so
with
with
caution.
like yeah, sparingly and really precisely.
Yeah,
Like I think it gets way worse if they're distributed badly or really exploitable in some way to gain an advantage. Like I think that's when they really start to trip up the overall design.
yeah. I mean,
And I think, to be fair, like I think the essence,
any mechanic where like everybody gets to eat a slice of pie while you get a pie to the face, not a great feel.
I think the SNC Winmore mechanic was fine as a Winmore mechanic, right? I just think the fact that it's a Winmore mechanic makes it more vulnerable to other problems. Like it's got to be so precise. So once people started being able to deny people their bonus packs, right? Or once it became hard to find matches to get your bonus packs, then it being a win more mechanic really became a problem,
To be fair, I don't know
like
if we
real quick.
actually got to that point though. I don't know if like so the griefing was
Yeah.
such that that was the concern that was heard loud and clear. The
Yeah.
reality was I don't know if people would have had that deep of a problem. I don't know if it was that unbalancing. In theory, it was a bit
Yeah.
troubling, but you know,
But I think if it's not a win more mechanic, you don't have that problem in the same way, right? It's the fact that some people might capture more of the win more mechanic in a
yeah,
really big way that makes it so rough. I think,
yeah,
but I actually I'm saying this in defense of it as a win more mechanic. I actually think it is like the right level if we're going to do a win more mechanic
yeah.
to have it be a little bonus, a single pack every 4 wins. Yeah, that's probably the right amount of win more if we're going to do something win more.
Yeah, I feel like maybe
I
we
think
have to
that's
distinguish between feel bad and is bad, right? Like I think
yeah,
there's a perception from some people that like this just it's bad because it feels bad, but sometimes it might not actually be bad. And I think that's
yeah. I
that's that's
agree with that.
where marketing or let's say branding I think goes a long way
Yeah.
into sort of mitigating those feelings.
But your plane where you don't get any packs, I think, is bad and feels bad. So,
Well,
don't
so
take the distinctions you can.
let's go back to roulette then, right? So roulette, you have black, white, and in American roulette tables, you've got that little green spot. Right? And that little green spot means
Yeah.
that people that bet on red lose, and also people that bet on black lose. And that little green spot is great for some and terrible for others. And I think that having that green spot on the roulette wheel opens up something different. Something like each spin is a little more uncertain. This isn't exactly 50-50 anymore between good and better. It's like there's something actively bad in the mix here that I might get stuck with. And I think that that adds a little bit of a thrill to the spin if you're going to rely on the spin. If you're not going to rely on the spin, maybe you don't need to have a possibly bad thing
Yeah.
on the menu. But if you're relying on chance to give you that thrill, then the chance of something slightly punishing happening, I think, still has some appeal.
Yeah, I think there can be feel bad, punishing mechanics that are good and interesting. So I think like in the space of losing cards from your pool somehow, that's the kind of thing that feels bad, but you can design a really compelling mechanic around it,
Right.
you know? I don't think the same thing about sometimes you just don't get a pack. And it's not even distributed evenly between people, which number of packs you don't get. Like that to me is like that feels bad and just kind of isn't interesting. Isn't, you know? So I don't know. I don't know that. I don't know. Yeah, I don't think we had anything feels bad like that in SNC, but we did have the Winmore issue really live.
Yeah.
Uh, and it was good though. And that inspired in our first plane chase the Winmore SNC plane, where you got to copy a common. That was too far, I think. Or no, not even copy a common. That was it was copy any card
Yeah.
if you won from the losers pack. Uh, so we revisited Winmore on the back of SNC, and it was too much there, but it was still fine. Like I think that was again, I would tone it down, but we did win more interestingly there as well.
Yeah.
When we revisited SNC in miniature for a week. So maybe that's just the SNC thing is win more.
That's
That's its
right.
identity.
That's right. The rich get richer. Well, Adam, thanks for joining me for this look back
Yeah,
at
good chat.
New Capenna. We got a little spiraled out there towards the end on future league designs and where we're going to go with those, but I think mostly we stayed within the wheelhouse of New Capenna and the faction leagues more generally. Hopefully, our audience enjoyed our discussion and it gives us something to sort of refer back to when we start to look at Tarkir Dragonstorm.
Absolutely.
Thanks for your time. It's been a pleasure. Bye for now, Adam.
Sure. Bye, Chris.
Later.